Hello, wonderful people of the internet. Today is the 1st of December, so I thought, heck, what better time to talk about horror, something nice and light-hearted and merry to really get us excited for Christmas.
Excuse me?
Which is only 24 days away now. So let's get into it. So, if you've been here for a while now, you'll know that I really, really like the horror genre, and that some of my favourite books at the moment, actually, my top two, are horror books, and that would be, they're out of frame here, actually, no they're not, that would be The Shining and Misery, both by Stephen King. And horror is something that I haven't really talked about fully. I've spoken about villains, but that was a bit different, and today I am currently in the middle of reading a book series called One Piece. Now, if you know what that is, don't worry, I'm not going to read all 100 books. I'm just reading the first saga, and I'm about 3/4 of the way through. So, give or take, 2 more videos, I should be done with that, and you'll get a review for that, and I'm very excited to talk about it. But now, I didn't know what I was going to be talking about, because, I can't talk about the books. I didn't really want to do a book tag, and I've already spoken about anime quite a lot, so I thought I'd talk about, horror, because I'm very passionate about it. And today at school, I finished watching The Woman in Black, which is a very effective horror film, and I've got quite a lot to say about that, and so I thought I would rope that in with a video about the horror genre in film and books in general. So let's get into it. Now, to give you some context, I am a bit of a wimp, but that does not mean that I can't enjoy the horror genre, because as I said, it's one of my favourite genres. So, I do get scared easily, but when I'm getting scared, while it's uncomfortable, I'm admiring the creator for being able to sort of create that emotion in me, because when you watch a horror film, and it's meant to be scary, or you read a horror book, and it's meant to be scary, but it's not, you just feel underwhelmed, because you think, well, they just didn't make that well. If you read a horror book that scares you, even though you're scared, you're like, wow, I am reading something really good here, and this person knows what they're doing. And so that is why I really enjoy it. Yes, I get very scared very easily, and I'll be like, and I'll be looking behind me all the time. I still get lots of enjoyment from it, and I like to see how different people approach horror, and how, different ways that they create tension and scare the viewer. Now, we'll start with The Woman in Black, since that is the thing freshest in my mind. So, this is a 2012 film based on a book. It's an old book. I can't remember who it was written by, but it was adapted into a 2012 film, and that is what I am going to talk about. So, the 2012 film stars Daniel Radcliffe, who, played Harry Potter, and this is actually his first film since the Harry Potter franchise, so this was a big deal for him, because he wanted to show, the film critics, I'm not just, the child actor who played Harry Potter, I could do more than that. And I'm not really going to go into the film, because I'm talking about the horror, not the film. He did really good, so, bravo to him. But what I am going to talk about is the horror in this story. So The Woman in Black is about Daniel Craig, that's James Bond, Daniel Radcliffe's character going to, this coastal village. He's a lawyer, and so he's sent there to sort out the papers and the will of a woman who's recently deceased, and she's called Mrs. Drablow. And her house was on a causeway, so that's an island separated from the mainland, but except from by road, and this road or path is covered every now and then by the ocean at high tide. So you can only get in when it's low tide, and then once you're there, you can't get out. So immediately we've got a good horror setting, It's frustrating because the character can't get off, so if anything bad's happening, he's stuck there until low tide, and so I'll talk about that later, but that is already a really good horror setting. But then the main horror of the story, The Woman in Black, is he's there, and it's a haunted house. This is a ghost story, and so there's some weird stuff going on, and he sees a woman just, for a split second, standing on the grounds looking down, and completely in black, like mourning. And that's a bit weird, because no one else lives on this island, so he's a bit spooked by that. And he goes into town the next day, into the coastal village, and these people have been scared of him from the start. They've been very xenophobic, sort of like, staying away, treating him as alien. A child dies in front of him. So these two children bring their sister with them, and they say, "Help us, sir, our sister drank light." And then she coughs up blood and dies. And it's like, whoa, kid just died. That's a bit weird. And this would seem really obscure and unconnected to The Woman in Black, if not at the start of the film they had this scene where there are three sisters playing sort of like tea party with dolls and stuff, and they look directly towards the camera, get up, and then jump out of a window. And then the camera pans back, and it's revealed that there is a woman in black standing in the corner. And so it's already established. Woman in black equals dead children. And so as a viewer, the woman in black has caused this. And, people are blaming him, or they're like, even more aggressive towards him. You just go back, don't come back. They sort of see him as responsible. But he doesn't listen. It's like, because he doesn't know what's going on. He's just like, a child's died and it's sad, but he's got to do his work. And so he goes back to the causeway and starts to get even more sort of aware of the supernatural influences here. So forgive me if I'm not getting this in completely chronological order, because I started this film 2 weeks ago and then I've only finished it today. So I might get the days mixed up. But he's walking on the causeway, and he can hear stuff in the marsh. He can hear a child screaming and a horse neighing, and it seems like it's this horse and carriage with a child in it is sinking in the marsh. And you've seen in this marsh before that there's a cross, like marking a grave. So instantly, there's a dead child in the marsh somewhere. What's that about? And, while he's going around the house, the Ilmarsh house, that's what it's called, there's a kid's room, and there are toys randomly playing in it. They just start in the middle of the night, and I swear to God I was terrified, but they start shaking their maracas, and so that a kid lived here. And he goes back into town after a very, very traumatic night of noises with the toys, and him seeing things. Like, he saw some of the children that he saw were dead, and he saw a dead child covered in mud, and the woman in black herself. They were all just playing tricks on him, and it is one of the most terrifying parts of a horror movie I've ever watched, which I'll get into in a minute. But he goes back to town with this guy. So I forgot to mention this guy. There's a guy in this town who has a car. That's his main characteristic. I'm the guy with the car. He's called Sam. I actually really like Sam, but I'll talk more about him in a minute. So he's with him. And then they find a house on fire, and the guy realises that there's a girl in there, and he saw this girl locked in a basement earlier. And he's like, oh no, she's killing herself too. So he runs into the house, down into the basement, and he sees her standing there with a lamp and with fire all around her, like an oil lantern. And he looks into the corner, and there's the woman in black standing there looking at the girl, and the girl looks at her, chucks the lamp on the ground, and sets herself on fire. And so at this moment, Arthur's knows now, the woman in black, this woman in black is causing children to kill themselves. And so he talks to Sam's wife. Now, a previous scene early on involved Sam's wife, and this was really disturbing in a different way to most of the film. So Sam and his wife's child died when quite a while back, and it was caused by the woman in black. And the wife believes this, Sam does not. But she has sort of to cope with the grief, got 2 dogs, and treats them like children. She dresses them up, she feeds them with spoons, and rocks them to sleep in a cradle. And so that's really disturbing, seeing how she's handling that. But she seems to have some sort of demonic possession thing happen to her when her son takes control of her and draws a hanging person on the table with a knife. And so the guy knows that this woman knows something, so he goes to talk to her. And she reveals to him, the woman in black is always there when a child dies. Whenever someone goes to the house and sees the woman in black there, a child dies. And so this is why the locals were afraid of him. They knew this. If he went to the house, he'd see the woman in black, and then their children would die. So that's the source of the xenophobia. But she also reveals that the woman in black sort of takes control of the kids and makes them kill themselves. And this is because the woman in black was separated from her child when she was when she gave birth, because I believe she wasn't married, and so well, you can't have a child then. And so Mrs. Drablow took the child and raised it as her own, but she wouldn't let the woman see it. And through some series of events, the child drowned in the marsh on the way to the house one day, And the woman in black is fuming at this. She's like, rot in hell. That was actually a thing she wrote in a letter that's revealed. And then she hung herself. So the woman in black is a vengeful spirit, getting revenge on parents in this town, killing their children so that they know the pain that she did. Now Arthur, Daniel Radcliffe's character, has a child who's coming to this town, and he's like, well, heck, I better get my child away from here. But the house that burned down was the post office, so he's got no way of getting that telegram there. So he has to go to the house, and he thinks, right, if I reunite the woman in black with her dead child, surely she'll stop killing children. So he does this whole ritual thing, and then it doesn't work. This ritual doesn't work, and he meets up with his child, and then the child sees the woman in black and throws himself onto a railway track. Daniel Radcliffe jumps in, and they both get hit by a train. And then that's the end of the movie, and we get a nice little scene in heaven where they get reunited with his deceased wife. But that's a summary of the story. And so there's a lot to break apart here. So the part that I mentioned as being disturbing, the bit with the woman, that's one bit of horror because it's sort of psychological, not in a thriller sort of way, but it gets to you because it's very human. You can see someone doing that, handing the death of their child by getting dogs and treating them like that. And that was really hard to watch for me because it's like, it was so human and so real and so terrifying because it's like, imagine if that happened to someone you knew or you yourself. So there's that sort of psychological, emotional horror there, but then there's, the proper ghost horror. And I spoke about a sequence in the night when he's being tormented by the woman in black and the ghosts of the dead children. I have mixed feelings about this. Now, this film is very jump scary, and I can't remember who said it, that having a jump scare in a film is like a comedian tickling his audience to make them laugh. You're just forcing your audience to be scared because it's an emotional reaction. When something jumps out at you out of nowhere, you're going to get scared. And so it's a bit lazy. The tension comes from knowing, something's going to pop out at me. And don't get me wrong, there is some good horror here because you hear the noises and it's like, the heck is going on here? And you see dead children wandering around, it's like, the heck is going on here? But I found that the main source of unsettlement for me, unsettlement's probably not a word, but I'm going to use it. The main source of unsettlement here for me was just thinking, when the heck is this thing going to jump out at me? I had my eyes like this, and I was watching through my fingers, and things were carrying on jumping out. And jump scares are okay. I'm not saying never use jump scares. Jump scares can be good in films. It's very useful and can help relieve tension if you built it for ages. Having a jump scare helps relieve it. But when you use it to the degree that this film does, I feel like you are tainting the quality of a film a bit because you're relying so heavily on causing that instinctive reaction of something jumping out in the audience and using the dread associated with that to build tension. So it was effective and it wasn't at the same time. I feel like the best horror in this film was with the woman with the dogs. Some people might find it silly. I did not. I thought it was horrible. But I found that the woman in black was a very imposing figure. And the idea of the children dying, another great horror aspect. All the bits in the house weren't that great, but the bits when the children die and you see them die, that's really disturbing. Because children, are important to us. We see them as innocent. And, they're children, they're innocent and they're lovable, and it's like, you can't kill a child, but the children die, and it's like, whoa. It's very uncomfortable to watch that, and having this imposing figure of a woman completely dressed in black, watching it all, is so spooky. But as I said, the sequence in the house could have been good, but there were just too many jump scares. I couldn't enjoy the scene as much. I was like, oh my god, this is so nasty, but it wasn't fun. It was just like, hands. I was getting tired of getting jump scared, and so that's not too great. But overall, solid piece of horror. There was some really good stuff here. Now, if I'm going to talk about some other stuff now, Coraline. Now, Coraline is a film that you've probably heard about. It's quite notorious. It's a children's film, but it's bloody terrifying. Now, I watched this with my friends and I scared them both, so job well done. But this is a very scary kids film. And it doesn't use any jump scares. And that... Actually, there's one jump scare. But, what's one jump scare? A lot of the horror in this film does not come from the jump scare. It comes from the idea and the slow building of dread. So, it's about this girl called Coraline, and I'm going to be quicker with this summary than with the woman in black, who finds a little door in her house There's a book of it too. I'm describing the film, but the book's equally good and uses the same sort of horror. I'm pointing up here. The book's not there. The book's here. But it's about this girl called Coraline who moves into a new apartment, and there's a little door there, and she goes through it. And then she opens it in the day. It's bricked up. In the nighttime, she wakes up because mice, and she follows the mice or the rats in the book to the door, opens it, and there's a doorway, and it's like, well, okay. She goes through it, and it looks like she's in the same house, but it's nicer, and she goes into the kitchen because she can hear someone humming and singing, and it sounds like her mum. And she goes, "Hi, Mum," and the woman turns around, but she's not got eyeballs, she's got buttons. And immediately, that's really unsettling, because that plays into the uncanny valley, which I spoke about in my mega review with Psycho. But it plays into the uncanny valley because you have an image of what a human should look like, and the buttons are not compatible with your image in your brain, and your brain's going, "Oh my god, what is going on?" And so you get unsettled by that. So you get that, and then it's revealed slowly that this other mother, as she calls herself, and the other father are not entirely friendly, and that she's in a heckload of trouble. Nothing ever jumps out at her, except from this one time. But the dread of being like, she's in a serious load of trouble, and watching it unfold is sort of the horrors and there's a lot of disturbing imagery. Ghost children, again, they prey on the children, and, the mother herself. Just builds a sense of dread, and you feel for the character. So no jump scares were needed to make that film scary, because the idea and the images were scary enough. Another example is The Shining. Now, this was my favourite book until I read Misery. Misery's not really a horror, so I won't touch on it too much here, but I probably will cover it. But The Shining, as far as I can remember, movie has no jump scares. At all. And I didn't find it scary, but I've heard a lot of people going, "This is the most disturbing horror film I have ever watched." And so, we'll go with the fact that it is scary, even if I don't find it scary. The book's scary. The book is very scary. Movie not so much, but it doesn't have jump scares. It's relying on this building sense of dread again. Now, it's about a guy going crazy with his family in an isolated hotel. Talking about setting in a minute. Isolated hotel, great. But you have this building sense of dread because they're in this location where they're stuck, and you've got this guy, and he's becoming a threat, and you know that the characters are pretty much hopeless, and so the fear and the horror comes from the tension of watching as it slowly builds, as this guy gets slowly crazier, and you're like, well, what are they going to do? And when he finally starts trying to kill them, I'll put a spoiler warning at the start of this video, but when he finally starts, trying to kill them, that is pretty scary as well. There's no jump scares, but just having this big hulking man with an axe or mallet in the book running after you for a haunted hotel that wants him to get you is such a scary idea, and it comes from the tension again. The fear of something bad is going to happen, and not knowing how it's going to be resolved, and the stakes getting higher and higher. It's more and more likely for someone to get hurt, or more and more people are getting involved in this. It's really, really, really successful. And it didn't need a jump scare, because the horror comes from this sense of dread and tension stemming from this wild card, or the threat. And I'm not very qualified to be talking about this, so it might not make much sense, but I'm just giving my opinion. But, as I mentioned, I would talk about setting. That's another really important thing for a horror book, turning Scottish all of a sudden. But, Overlook Hotel. Hotel on the top of the Colorado Mountains, cut off from the rest of the world because of snowdrift and snowstorms. Great setting for something terrifying to happen. Eel Marsh House, can't get off of it unless the tide's down. Great, because you're trapped, and, human nature, we don't like being trapped, we like to be able to get away. In Misery, I can talk about this now, main character's a guy with broken legs in a house in the middle of nowhere. So he can't go anywhere, because he can't move, and even if he did, where would he go? So, I feel like setting is also really key for a good horror story. Doesn't always have to be, but most of the time. Because that is where a lot of your tension is going to come from. If the Overlook Hotel was in the middle of, a bustling high street, and the family could just walk out at any point and it'd be fine, wouldn't be scary. But the tension of not being able to get out, that is scary. And so having a good setting is very important, I think, for a horror film. Now, It, which is also down here, haven't read the book but watched the film. That scared me a lot. That had a few jump scares, but that, won't get into it. Haven't got enough time. Don't want to keep you here for too long. But the setting for that is a big town, so in Maine, it's called Derry, and it's not like you can't get out. The tension here still sort of comes from the setting. So in part one of the book or the first film, the characters are children, they're kids, and so when this clown monster starts eating them, no one believes them, and so it's up to them to try and stop it. And there, some of the the tension comes from as well, the horror, because the setting means that the characters are helpless, or the situation more like. Where the character is set, or the sort of situation of the characters is important. So that'll come under the bracket of setting. But since the characters are children, and no one's believing them, it's up to them to tackle the villain. And so that is, in itself, scary. Because, they're just children. How are they going to beat this killer alien clown thing? So horror comes from that as well, because it seems hopeless, the tension there. So setting is really important. And so I've just spoken about tension instead of jump scares, and I've spoken about setting. What else is there to cover? So I spoke about the woman with the dogs in The Woman in Black, and so emotional horror can be really successful as well. So a horror film does not need to have a monster to be scary. Talking about The Shining again, since this is one of the only horror books I've read, The Shining is not just about a haunted hotel, it's about the guy who's going crazy, Jack Torrance. There's a lot of horror coming from how he's being manipulated. Like, it's disturbing to read, because you've got this very human character. Stephen King is brilliant at writing characters, so this guy is basically a person, and he's, you care for him in a way. He's not a very good person, but you care for him, because you could see a good man behind all the bad qualities, but you're watching him go crazy and be manipulated by this supernatural entity. And so the horror comes from seeing that happen and seeing how the human mind or emotions can twist or, react in certain situations. So horror can be really good if you take a character in extreme situations or times of stress and make them something disturbing happen with their emotions, something very raw, or, drastic, or just minorly unsettling because it's sad. Just make something happen with their emotions and I can guarantee something scary will happen. So I summarised that really badly. Sorry. But if you get... I'll try and say it again. If you get a character whose emotions are in turmoil and make them cope with that, or something happened to them because of that, there's something bad happened to them because of that happen, it can be really disturbing. Because the woman with the dogs is reacting to her son's death in a way that is, quite frankly, just sad. And so that's unsettling for the viewers. Jack Torrance of The Shining, very weak-minded person, and so seeing how a person who's struggling through, family problems and drinking issues and all of that, and how they can be manipulated to basically try and kill their whole family is scary. Because you can relate, and so having a very human person or a very human reaction to a situation can be scary because you can relate. Relatability is important. So with It, everyone's been a kid once sometimes, and everyone's been a kid sometimes. No, everyone has been a kid at some point, and so that means that they can relate to the feeling of hopelessness. Because when you're a child, you are scared at the boogeyman, you are scared at the thing under your bed, and no one believes you because they know better, or think they do, in the case of It. So you can relate to these kids and their struggle with this supernatural entity, and it is so scary. And as I said, seeing kids in danger is unsettling because they're so innocent and good, so they shouldn't be hurt, and the human brain. I'm not a psychologist, by the way, I might be wrong. Anyway, moving on. Body horror. We're going to talk about body horror now. We're nearing the half-an-hour mark, so I'll try and wrap this up quickly. Body horror is another really good way to scare people. And now I'm looking over here because I have the book Uzumaki by Junji Ito over there. Now, you might have heard me talk about this before. Really quite unsettling, and it is a comic book or manga, so that means that, you know, pictures. And that's a good way, that's really ideal for body horror, because you could show weird things happening to the human body. And this is scary because of something called the uncanny valley, which is something that I mentioned before with The Other Mother. Now, the uncanny valley is basically when you take something familiar and twist it just a bit. That's why an android or a robot can be unsettling, because it's like a human, but not quite. So if you take, like in Uzumaki, spirals are infecting this town like a parasite, and infecting humans and making them react in different ways. Quite a lot of times, making weird stuff happen to their body, and making their arms turn to spirals and disgusting stuff like that. And so watching the human body be twisted in disgusting and gruesome ways is frightening because of the uncanny valley, because you've got the human body and you do this really disgusting thing to it. And as I said, the brain is like, what the hell? Does not compute, does not compute, does not compute, I'm scared. And so this is really more usable in the visual medium rather than, books. But if you want to scare the audience, maybe it's a bit less tactful and artful than, building suspense from setting and situation and threat, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's certainly a good and easy way of doing it. Not quite as cheap as jump scares, but it's there, because if you do it right, you don't want to make it seem too stupid, because then it's almost laughable. If you twist the human body in such a way that it's like, ha ha ha, stupid, you're not scaring anyone. But if you just do something really gross, like in Uzumaki, this guy gets into a round container and breaks all his bones so that he's twisted into a spiral shape, and you see it, and it's like, ew. That is disgusting. And so you have to have a bit, that's certainly not subtle, but you have to handle body horror quite carefully, because if you go too all in with it, it can seem more silly than scary. So body horror is good in, moderation. Now, threat. Threat is quite important as well. This is sort of touching on the How to Write Good Villains video, which I'll link up here. Now, the threat has to be, for a good threat anyway, can symbolise a deeply rooted human fear. So in The Shining, Jack Torrance, who is sort of the threat, we're going to talk about the film a bit more because it's easier. Jack Torrance is scary because he's the symbol of that abusive figure, that abusive father, that abusive lover. If you've been in that sort of situation, Jack Torrance will be hella scary to you, because it's a relatable threat. You've been there. With Pennywise the Clown in It, he's, the monster under the bed and in the cupboard, so he's scary because you can relate to the fear associated with it. You've been there. As I said in the How to Write Good Villains video, Godzilla. He is the embodiment of Japan's fear of nuclear weapons at the time the original movie was made, and so he's scary because it's preying on the viewer's fear. And so that's a great way to use horror, the unknown. Make your threat unknowable or really mysterious, and it will be quite scary. Or make it an embodiment of the unknown. Someone who's good at this is this guy here, H.P. Lovecraft. His monsters are eldritch horrors, or, gods or monsters from other dimensions that you cannot understand, and so they are quite scary because they symbolise the unknown in the greater universe and what us as people don't understand. So having a monster that sort of embodies a fear that people can relate to is really, really effective. So now I've spoken about it. I've spoken about relatability on the terms of emotions, body horror, the setting, and the threat/monster itself. Sort of the 4 key things. And I've spoken about building tension as well without jump scares. So hopefully this has been quite an interesting video. But that is sort of it. Now, I just remembered something that I was going to talk about in the tension building section. And this is a analysis that I found on YouTube. Do not watch it if you're easily scared, but if you are, I'll link it up here. It's about a scene from a movie called Cairo that feels like it should have a jump scare, but doesn't. And so it's involving a ghost, and I won't go into too much detail because it's quite spooky. Don't want to talk about it and risk upsetting any of you. If you're interested, click the link that was up there. And it is very unsettling, but it goes into quite well how you can build tension without using a jump scare. And as I said, it's the scene that feels like it should have a jump scare, and so it not being there and just letting the tension carry on building without relief is very effective. But we'll leave it there. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on Sunday. Getting confused about the days now. Have a good one, y'all. Bye.